Hi and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today. For the free tutorial today, we're having a mini make. What we're going to do is use the materials from the July episode of the I.C.E social group. So we each received the same items and there are basically no rules. We can create with whatever additionals we like, but we do need to work with those basic materials. So let's head down to the board and I'll show you what those materials are and then we'll make something. So we've got two beautiful Prehnite pad beads and they are drilled side to side, soft facets on those. And we've also got 8 of those rose quartz beads. Now let's have a look. The rose quartz beads are 8mm and the Prehnite pads vary, but this one is 25mm. So I'm going to put my thinking cap on and see what I can come up with for this I.C.E social challenge. So I've got my professional coiling gizmo out of the corner and I've made this double gizmo coil. So I have used 0.6 or 22 gauge wire to create a spiral coil on that rod, and then I have woven that around the rod again, utilising techniques you can find out about here in one of my old videos all about how to create coils for use in jewellery. So it was 0.6mm gauge wire that I used to create that coil of a coil, and I now have some 0.8mm or 20 gauge wire which I'm going to thread up the middle of that spiral. Now you do need to kind of make sure that your wire is good and straight and perhaps have a little bit of flex ready in that because sometimes it just doesn't quite want to go through. However, today we're in luck and it just threaded really nicely. So you can play around with different aspects of coiling. This is a double spiral piece that I've created. You can also add a third layer if you wanted to. So here's something similar that I'm going to be working with on another project later on. This has had another layer of wire coiled over the top of the first 2 layers. So all good fun. What we're going to do now, and this is around about a 20 length of that 0.8 or 20 gauge wire, we're just going to create a simple wrap to create a surround for one of our lovely Prehnite pads. I haven't decided which one yet. So what I tend to do on a design like this is make sure that I flush cut that end. Don't want any rough pieces coming up later. And then I'm going to make a tiny spiral using the 2mm pin on my memory wire finishing pliers. So let's just rotate that around a couple of times. And what I like to do is to have the cut end of the wire in the same position as the wire leaving that little spiral that we've made. So I've got 3 little wraps. Just need to take that off the memory wire finishing pliers. I might have made that a little bit firm. There we go. What I'm going to do now is to thread the other end of that 0.8 or 20 gauge wire all the way through and just create a closed loop. This is one of the easiest ways you can use a piece of gizmoed or coiled wire. In this instance, it's double coiled. And I'm just going to bring that together carefully, making sure that those 2 ends kind of nestle together as closely as they can. What I'm going to do then is just bring that wire back away. So I've got some nice tension, which means that I can play around with the shape of that double gizmoed form as I like. And I'm just going to trim away to around about 1.5 inches. Save that for later, I'm sure we'll find a use for it. And then I'm going to generate a small spiral to sit over the spiral that we use to tie everything together. So you could use the tip of your round nose pliers. I'm going to make a start again with those memory wire finishing pliers simply because they're right there to hand. So we've got the little start of a spiral there. Push that into my non-dominant hand and it's really easy to make a spiral. I'm using raw copper wire today, so that raw copper is beautifully fluid, and being as this is 0.8mm or 20 gauge wire, it's just a little bit softer. So I'm going to push that down over the top just to hide the gubbins. And at this stage you have the opportunity to make that round, or in our instance a little bit oblong. So I'm just going to very, very softly play with that until it sits how I want it to sit. And then I'm going to add that into the center of my design. Now, because we've got drilled through. I may actually sit this in the opposite fashion. So normally I will make a pendant in a portrait fashion, but today I think we're going to make it in that landscape fashion. So here, wouldn't you know it, we have a scrap of that 0.8 or 20 gauge wire. I'm just going to thread that through the centre of my bead. I hadn't actually tried it, but as luck would have it, that does actually fit. So that's a win for me. So what we're going to do is decide which is the face of our design, and I like that spiral to be visible. However, on the other side, it's a nice interesting design anyway, so whichever you prefer really. What I'm going to do is to thread one end up into the middle of that gubbins up at the top, and then I'm going to decide whether I want to hide my finer wire just here in the centre of the coil like so. I think I prefer that underneath, so I'm just going to pop that underneath and see how that sits. So very, very simplistic design today. What I'm going to do is to bring that wire sideways so that I can just squish that up inside that coil, and you can bring that out of the way if it's easier for you to see. Let's take that off for a moment actually. What we're going to do is just pull that all the way around on the back of the design and just link that through two of those coils. Before looking on the rear side, we're just going to use tension today, so I'm going to trim that very, very close to the back of the design, and then very, very carefully I'm just going to push that end down inside and push those coils over the top so that it hides it. You can take a second just to put a bit of a bend on the end so that if it ever comes out, it's not pointy or scratchy, and then just nestle everything back together. So this again is the front of the design we're looking at now. So smooth your tail of wire through and let's slide that down into position. Now what we can do is just bring everything into how we want it to fit. I'm just going to make it slightly more oblong, and then I'm going to draw that carefully around this connection point. What I would actually really like to do is pop that up inside those three little spirals that we made so that everything neatly connects together, and it's a good reason for using that softer wire. So we've now set that in the middle of our little design, and I'm just going to pull that until it sits how I want it to. Now what I have the opportunity to do is to bring that firmly down over the back of the design, and if you don't want your pad to spin, you could use a spiral of this wire on the back to stop it from moving. In fact, I think that is what I'm going to do. I am just going to trim away that end section. We've got about a 2 and a bit inch length of wire on the end there. I'm just going to rotate that wire around to create a spiral, and this is going to sit over the back of the design. So what you can do is just move quite slowly if you want a really neat one. What we're going to do is just make a bit of a spiral to sit over the surface of the back of that design. Now we'll have the opportunity later to use a much finer wire to tie this in position on the rear side, but for right now I want to see what else I fancy doing, and I think probably I'm going to use some of these beads. As is frequently my way, I instantly changed my mind and I popped that coil neatly up to the top instead, so now it's double faced. I think I actually don't mind it wiggling around a bit, but I might put layers over the top. So let's have a look at what else we can work with. We've got a second pad which we can use if we want to, and we've got some rose quartz beads as well. What I'm going to do is start with a couple of 12-inch lengths of 1mm or 18 gauge wire and create some woven sections. So we're making on the fly today. I have absolutely zero plan, so let's see where this takes us. I'm going to be working directly from the reel with my beautiful raw copper wire, and I'm going to just do a basic weave. Let's get rid of that rough bit on the end, shall we? So what we're going to do is probably run a couple of times around one of those wires. Let's get 3 little wraps going. And then I'm going to bring another wire in. So I'll pop that over the top for now. And I've left a good couple of inches of wire bare at one end. What I'm going to do is 3 wraps around one of those, and then I'm going to do 1 around both, and then I think I'm going to switch to the other side just to make a change. So I'm going to bring that wire up between the ends just here, and I'm showing you with the short length of wire so that you can get a feel for the weave. So 3 wraps on the upper wire now. Bring that all the way around so that you've got a visible wrap around both of those wires. Scooch it up into position so it's neat and tidy, and then I'll finish off with 3 wraps on the lower wire. Just going to splay those apart to get that through to begin with, keeping those nice and tight. So the pattern is 3 around one wire, 1 around both, and then 3 around the other, and it will work exactly the same in the opposite direction. So I've got 3 wraps here, 1 wrap around both, and then I'll finish with 3 wraps up at the top. All I will need to do then is flip into the opposite direction. So you can see already I've got 3 wraps on what is now the upper wire, and then we will need to do 1 wrap around both, and so on and so forth. So I filled about 5 inches of that wire with weaving, and just as a little heads up, there are 2 sides on this weave. On the upper face, you have that 3 wraps around one side, 1 wrap around both, 3 wraps around the alternating side. If you flip it over, it looks completely different. You have a naked section between those 2-3 wraps, and then you have a double wrap. Either of those designs are really quite attractive, but my preference is for the one that I was aiming for, which is 3 around one side, 1 around both, 3 around the other side. So what I'm going to do is to start gently forming that around the outside of my little prehnite bead. And because this is a 1mm or 18 gauge core wire, it's quite strong. So you'll need to press down on that and just bring that around until it sits around the shape that you want it to. Now, there is a school of thought which says that you could use an oval mandrel and then flip those 2 wires side by side, but I actually prefer to do this by hand so that I can see that shape forming exactly how I want it to. Just know if you're struggling with grip strength, then there is an alternative to that. So I'm just going to keep on making this around the outside edges of my prehnite bead, and I'll meet you back in a moment. So I've created this kind of spiral shape with the slightly shorter ends of the wire going inside that framework. And then up towards the centre, I'm going to pull this wire away with the slightly longer ends, and this will become my bail wire. So this is a challenge, hadn't had any planning whatsoever as to what I was going to do, and this apparently is it. So what I will do now, I think, is just trim these 2 shorter wires so that I can make some small spirals to sit over the face of that prehnite. And obviously this is just completely on the fly. You don't have to follow along. It's just if you end up with a little bit of a slump and you need some kind of challenge, then you can always just pick some random pieces from your collection to create a challenge of your very own. So I'm going to just sit those spirals to sit however I think looks good, and I'll join you back in a second. So I've used the ends of the wire here to create some decorative spirals which will sit over the surface of that prehnite, and the other end of that woven section is coming away at the 12 o'clock position. I'm just going to slide that underneath one of the spirals that we created in the central section of that double gizmoed piece that goes all the way around the outside, and it's starting to kind of come together a bit now. So we will need to sew everything together in just a moment. I'm just going to push that spiral down to give me an idea of what the finished piece will look like. Overall, I'm quite happy with that, and this section is going to become part of our bail. I might just add some of those rose quartz up at the top, but for now we're going to find some finer wire and attach this section together. So I have an 18-inch length now of 0.4 or 26 gauge wire, and what I'm going to do is use this to tie together this spiraled woven section. And what we're going to do is just connect through one of those spirals to begin with. So I just push that wire through, take that about 1/3 of the way through, just pull the large proportion, which is about 2/3 of that wire, over to one side. And what I'm going to do is take the tail end, the shorter end, back through the outside of that spiral, and then push it down between the outer frame and the gemstone. So just pull that all the way through, keeping it nice and tight, and we will be able to connect these two. Now we also need to take the long piece down around the outside of the spiral, the small single spiral, but inside that woven spiral, and push that down between the gemstone and that double gizmoed frame. So it's quite springy wire at the moment. Let's just push that through, grab the other end and pull that neatly. Try not to put too much heat onto this finer gauge wire or it gets a little bit snappy. So let's just control that as it goes down. And what we'll be able to do in a moment is just bring those 2 wraps of wire on that spiral really neatly into position. So I'm going to just hold that spiraled woven section. Gosh, I wish there was a shorter way of saying that. Just in position very, very firmly, and then I'm going to use those access points in between the coils on my gizmoed section to hold this in position. So I'm going to bring the wire around this coil to begin with, all the way down and through again. You're just going to need to control that to make sure it disappears into the correct gap. So just feed that through until it disappears into that design. And I'm going to run that around the spiral a couple of times, using that spiral itself to just hide those wires away. So on the rear side, you can just pull that along sideways and hide it into the design. It will disappear really neatly. And then I'm going to bring that up in between the gemstone and the frame, but inside that spiraled section. So it can take a couple of stabs just to get that in there until it's in the right place. Come on through, you little sausage. There it is, where I need it to be. So pull that nice and firmly into position. And then once you've got that seated, we're going to use the tension of that finer wire to again bring this woven spiral section down into position. So I'm going to take that over the top, down between the gemstone and that coiled frame. Bring that really tightly across the back and you'll find that everything starts to come together. What I'm going to do next is bring these finer gauge wires all the way around across the back, and then I'm going to start tying things together from this position. So it's a case of just hiding these fine wires inside your gizmo work, and you'll find that if you make a nice firm needle on the end of this 0.4mm or 26 gauge wire, you can kind of use that to guide its path. So you can just sort of slide it into position and just hide it inside all of this gubbins. And I'll meet you back in a moment when I've got that nice and tight. So I'm going to make a really simple split bail up at the top here, just by strengthening that section of wire. I've tied everything together at the back. There are a couple of passes of wire over the back of the design, which will stop that prey knight from moving. I'm not overly fussed about that. So I'm going to bring those wires forward, just after the point at which I stopped weaving, grab myself a round mandrel, and then just bring those wires around a couple of times. I'm going to go for a very, very simple bail today. Just going to bring those all the way around. I think I'll go for a double wrap. So take that as close to the angle change as you can get it. Bring those wires around for a second time, and then all you'll need to do is just cross them over on that neckline section. So if you bring them quite close together and then cross one over in one direction, tie that around a good couple of times, and then bring the other one round at least once. So I'm going to take that to the rear side. All I'm going to do with these today is just trim them really neatly and press them so that they're safe. And once that is done, I'll separate those wires out so that we get a nice split bail effect. So I'll just hop on that and I'll be back in a sec. I've grabbed a 10-inch length of that 0.8mm or 20 gauge wire, and I'm going to make a little flower on the end, starting about 3.5 inches from one end. Just going to make a little petal shape. Very, very quickly forming that petal. If you would like to refer to videos detailing some more floral designs, I'll pop a link up here for you. And then we'll just open that out and around. So we're very, very quickly making a little bit of a leafy type shape. Draw that all the way through and wrap about 3 times, tighten that up, and then we're going to add in one of those rose quartzes. So let's just pop that one on the end of the wire. Again, I didn't try them to see if they fit, but they look like they've got a really good bead size drill hole aperture up the middle. And what I'm going to do is bring this tail of wire from the top of that core to round underneath, and just again wrap a good couple of times around. So that's 3 rotations of wire. Tighten that little spiral up. You can make it a lot neater if you choose to make something like this. This again is a challenge piece. So we've got some random bits and bobs. We've all received them. Fleur's going to have a go, and beautiful Katie is going to have a go as well. So we've got a nice little, very, very simple floral idea on the top there. And I'm just going to sit that over the top of my pendant, just below that bail. And then I'm going to wrap the tail around that bail section. So what you may want to do is just get that to sit in position. Bring that tail around, and then you can add another one of these on the other side if you like. So I think I'll go one more time around that neck section, tying everything together neatly. I don't think there's enough space for a second bead, if I'm completely honest, but there's definitely enough space for another one of those little leaf designs. So I'm going to just push the angle over, use my thumb to create that form. Bring that wire all the way back around. You can crimp that up a little bit if you need to. Another smooth arcing shape, hold that in position. And then we're going to wrap a couple of times around that core. So let's go for 3 wraps like we did on the first one. And then take that to the rear side, just tighten up that little spiral. And that will lock everything in place if I take that across the back of that neck section. And then you can just wrap a couple of times until that sits neatly. You could even finish with a little spiral if you wanted to. So let's grab some round pliers, or again, those memory wire finishing pliers. Favourite new tool of the last year. Absolutely love them. And we'll start a very small spiral with what wire I have left. And I'll just sit that down over the top of that section that connects the bail to the neck of the pendant. So there is my Ice Social challenge, utilising a Prehnite pad bead and a rose quartz round bead. I hope that you've had as much fun as I have. I do love a good challenge. Hopefully we'll be repeating this challenge next month again. Well, that was fun. A challenge piece today, utilising materials that were also sent to Fleur and Katie from the Ice Social Challenge group. So I hope that you've enjoyed that. I know that I have. It's kind of pushed me out of my comfort zone, if I'm honest. I do like to kind of have an idea of what I'm going to do on a video. Complete challenge today. Have a beautiful day, and I look forward to seeing you back soon. Don't forget, the last Monday of the month at 7 p.m. here on YouTube, on my channel, Katie's channel and Fleur's channel, you'll be able to join us for the Ice Social meeting. Have a great day. Bye.